and had to do it economically so that we were somewhat close to budget. And then as we started to migrate more to these cloud solutions, these public cloud solutions, the Amazon, the AWS, and Azure, cost management started to really become a challenge, and you have these horror stories of somebody left on an Azure SQL data warehouse and it cost them $15,000 that month because they were it spun up just a play environment, a sandbox or something. My own personal experience, the first time I spun up an Azure virtual machine with SharePoint, I'm like, oh, look at all these resources I have available to me, RAM and CPU, and I'm going to throw 16 gig of RAM and a couple 8-core CPUs at this thing and really see how fast it runs. And I cut out all of my spend in a matter of probably 24 hours that I had for my free license there that Microsoft gives for your free account. So then, Cloudin really understood that there was a challenge here, right? And so, they developed their platform to help with this, cost management, cost alerting, setting up budgets and things like that, so that you would know when you were having issues with cost. So that was then acquired by Microsoft, seeing that they were becoming really the predominant player in the cost management space. And so alongside some of the technology that Microsoft got from Cloudin, they created their own Azure cost management portal, and it just continues to expand and evolve. Cloudin is still there. It's still being used. So any legacy customers are still being supported, but many of the features are now being moved to Azure Cost Management. So hopefully at the end here, if we've got some time, we can do a little bit of demo and see where that comes in. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where all this came from, is really the idea is we want to be able to manage this, and Microsoft noticed the need to really help their customers out, to cut down some of the fear of moving to the cloud. So now when we talk about, how we want to plan out our cost management strategies, it comes, with looking at who the key groups are that are going to interact with that Azure environment, right? And, not every company's the same, but, this is generally, you've got your finance group who's going to be receiving the invoices and paying the invoices and, all that stuff, doing your cost allocation and stuff like that, right? You've got your management group that's going to, approve any of this. They're going to say, okay, well, why did your Azure bill just go up $5,000 last month? Why do we have a 50% increase? And on top of that, we got to look at our dev teams to say, hey, what are you deploying? What are you using? Why are your costs so high? Are you keeping an eye on these things? Do you need that super dual 8-core CPU with 128 terabytes of RAM? Do you need that kind of box, or can you? It's 128 gigabytes of RAM, but do you need something so beefy for what you're working on? And are you taking advantage of the features that allow you to lessen those and take those down, which we'll talk about a little more as we go on. And then as we're looking at it, right, what are we planning to do with Azure, right? Is this a data warehouse project? Are we looking to do an incremental migration where we're going to put some workloads up into the cloud to test it, to take advantage of the scalability and flexibility and elasticity of what Microsoft Azure has to offer? Are we just going to build a little pilot or a POC, or are we going to have a full-blown environment there and take down a data center to save some costs, still having the ability to have a true hybrid platform with our on-premises environment, other data centers, and Azure alike. And really, who is ultimately responsible, right? So, I think each development group's going to have a team lead or a manager that is going to keep an eye on these things, and those just roll up. But who would be the ultimate sponsor? Who's the ultimate decision maker? Is that the CIO? Is that the VP of engineering? Who decides that, we should really be spending our time and our money on a more flexible and scalable solution than buying more hardware on-prem, but we need to plan that out efficiently and effectively. And as Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So, as you start to get into this, I noticed that a lot of the people attending here today are just kind of getting into the cloud or just starting out and have a few things deployed. Well, let's step back and make sure we really fully understand what we want to accomplish with this move. So now, at a very high level, we look at the plans and the licensing, right? So you've got an enterprise agreement, you prepay for those accounts. One of the big things that you can save money on here is if you work with some of the larger VARs. I've heard as much as a 30% discount on licensing when it comes to an enterprise agreement, and a lot of times you can get discounted or credits to Azure by way of an enterprise agreement. Pay-as-you-go plan is just that. You're paying a monthly basis. You're putting your credit card in Microsoft Azure, and it's billing you monthly on that credit card. So that's typically for more siloed projects, small offshoots, test environments, things like that. And you have your MSDN dev accounts, right? So if you have an MSDN license and you subscribe to that with Microsoft, they typically give you a monthly credit. When I bring up my environment, you'll see that I have an MSDN account attached to my Azure environment. It's one of my subscriptions, and I think I get a $150 credit a month based on my MSDN account. So should definitely check with anybody who owns the licensing to see what you have available there. Reserved instances are a great way to prepay and save some pretty substantial money when you're looking at virtual machines and SQL databases. So, hey, I know I'm going to use this compute for the next anywhere from 1 year to 3 years. I can scale up at any time, but I know at a minimum I'm going to use, X number of vCores and virtual machine size, things like that, and Microsoft gives some pretty substantial discounts for things like that. Now, mind you, those are specific to those workloads, though. So when you start looking at the peripheral, so you look at things like storage or security features and things like that, typically those are billed at the full amount. The reserved instances are really for the virtual machines and the SQL DBs themselves for the licensing standpoint. And then you've got the hybrid use benefit. This is something that's probably not talked about enough or looked at enough. This is from Microsoft, and this helps you save significantly on your licensing costs by basically saying, hey, you've already bought all of this licensing for whether it be Windows Server or SQL Server, and you want to save some money there because you don't want to have to buy that licensing again. So you set it up so that you deploy those compute resources in a BYOL fashion, or bring your own license fashion. And you can apply what you've already purchased for your premises environment to your Azure environment, and that's something that you can check with your reseller or your Microsoft rep, or depending on what space you're in. If you're smaller, typically you go through a reseller. If you're in the enterprise space, then you're typically going through like a Microsoft rep for that kind of information. If you're just starting out and you don't know about some of these services and tools that are available, the Azure pricing calculator, if you're deploying a new workload or you want to just get a general idea of what costs are, you can go into the pricing calculator and you'll get the ability to really get a good sense of what you're going to need. It gives you some great information around SLAs that are tied to certain tiers. It'll give you a lot of information around what you can expect for service programs and any kind of premium features, and so it gives you a very good scorecard to understand, or at least estimate what your prices, what your full compute, full workload monthly expenditure is going to be. And then obviously there are ways from there to cut down on that by turning off turning off virtual machines or scaling down on Azure analysis services, things like that. So it's a good place to get your ceiling of what costs are going to be. The Azure Migrate tool is great for looking at your environment and see what it's going to be like to put VMs up into Azure and what that entails. The database migration service is, moving from your on-premises database, sources, SQL and Oracle and things like that, and the migration steps there. It's a great center for looking at different migration processes and how you should plan out your migrations. It gives you step-by-step instructions on how to plan for those kinds of things. Your app service, so if you're migrating a web app, same thing. It gives you a good idea on how to go through all that, and it gives you a lot of the steps to do so. The migration center itself, so whatever the workloads are, is definitely something you want to look at. And then this last one, the Cloud Economics program, is that, oftentimes Microsoft will incentivize customers, larger customers, mid-market to enterprise class. They will basically, pay for an assessment, have a partner like somebody like Pragmatic Works come in. We'll run some assessment tools in your environment, get the results of that back. We'll probably let it run for a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. We want to look at those peak periods so that we can get an estimated spend for what you would run in Azure. And so if you want more information about that, definitely contact your sales rep here at Pragmatic Works or your Microsoft rep and kind of talk you through that and find out if you qualify for that kind of program. Now, when we look at this, the keys to successful management, and this is not something that I've created. This is Microsoft. This is Microsoft really trying to help the customer and understand what's included here. But really, it's 3 steps, and then the 4th step is just continuously working on these 3 steps. You get the visibility, the accountability, and the optimization. And so when we look at the visibility piece, we really want to make sure that when we set up subscriptions, when we set up our details of our environments within Azure, that we are aligning to what the teams need. So if we're going to set up a subscription, for a specific line of business or a specific department, or even a specific project, let's make sure that we're including the resources from a visibility standpoint to make sure that they know what their expenditure is. And then there's the tagging functionality so that you can slice and dice based on tags within those resources that are deployed in Azure. You can also set up budgets. I'll give a quick example of that in a little bit here, where you have the ability to set notifications and alerts to tell you when you're coming close to reaching the budget level or you're halfway there. If you hit 50% of your budget on the 2nd day of the billing cycle, you're going to want to know about that, right? Because you're going to know why the expenditure is so high when you're not expecting it to be at that point, or maybe you are, and just you want to know how quickly it's the clock is burning, if you will. And then by doing these things, by being notified, by keeping people informed, it really helps them to eliminate unnecessary expenditure for that monthly recurring cost. The next is really the accountability, right? So we talked about segmenting those expenses by subscriptions and resource groups. So I'm very specific that I use every sort of project that I work on, I build a specific resource group for that project, name it as such, tag it as such, to be able to know what my different resource groups are costing me, and then I can drill into those more specifically and look at where the true cost is. And so we'll do that as we kind of look at the portal a little bit. But as we talked about the planning, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at how we're segmenting this information, how we're segmenting our subscriptions and our resource groups, and that helps us then send those alerts and notifications to the users who are doing it, right? As with everything, this is a monthly invoice, right? And you want to review that, and you want to compare it against your budgets, whether they be a budget that's set up inside of Azure or, a budget that's set up with the finance group. And then, hey, I spent 15,000 this month and I only budgeted for 10. Let's dig in and figure out what those anomalies were. Why did it cost me more than I was expecting? Did I leave some compute on accidentally, or, did I not set up the budget properly to alert me that I was going to go over, and really take the time and investigate that. And then you've got a cost analysis tool built into the portal itself that helps you do some future planning. And this gives you the ability to at least estimate where you're going, right? So here we are on the 9th day of the month. My billing cycle ends on the 24th, which means that I'm approximately halfway through the month. Where am I in my spend? Where does Azure anticipate that I'm going to go? And this is some real basic straight line predictive analytics, just based on what you've spent already throughout the course of this month. It's very basic, but at the same time, it gives you that visibility of what you can expect that expense to be. And lastly is optimization, right? Some of the big ones that are really, really simple that people just forget is you can turn off your virtual machines. You can say, hey, I can spin down this virtual machine at 7 o'clock tonight. Remember to save your work, right? That's one thing. We have a nasty habit of leaving our virtual machines on, and unfortunately, we also leave them in a state where we're using resources, or we're in the middle of developing something, or we have something open that we didn't save. So make sure that you're saving things if you set this option. But really, when you turn off your virtual machines and you're not using any of that compute that's dedicated to your machines, all you're paying for at that point is really the storage, which is very inexpensive and minimal. And so when you break it down that way, it actually gives you a really good option for dev and test environments to be able to play around with different features and functionality, be able to spin up a virtual machine very quickly. It's going to bill at a monthly basis, but if you only use it for a couple hours a month, it's going to be pretty minimal from a cost standpoint. One of the big ones that you can do is use Azure Automation for developing scaling plans, right? So you go back to my Azure Analysis Services example, where you can automatically scale that up and or out and down and or in order to lessen the amount of your expenditure and lessen the amount of compute that's being thrown. So if say for instance you're using Azure Analysis Services as your backend for Power BI, and that your reports are not being consumed between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., you can spin that down all the way for those hours, and that's a third of your day that you're saving the company. And so if you look at Azure Analysis Services, you turn it off on the weekends because you don't need reporting, you turn it off at night. Now you're saving over a third of that monthly cost, and that makes a big difference. And you can do that with many services, many policies with these Azure Automation runbooks. And lastly, create internal policies and governance plans. Create a policy that you have to review your invoices every month, right? And review your compute, just to make sure that people are actually doing what they need to, and make it a policy and a priority within the company to keep an eye on these things. We talked about the hybrid use benefits and the reserved instances, right? So those are definitely something that you want to consider if you have a long-term project, or if you have a very good idea of what the workload is going to be, because you have years of experience in the space, and you know exactly what those requirements are. You can use your hybrid use benefits and reserved instances to save some money there. And this is something definitely you want to talk over with, again, your VAR or your Microsoft rep, because the Azure plans are somewhat more friendly than what AWS provides, as far as the contracts and the language around the contracts. I've heard very positive results and sort of feedback from customers that Azure is much more customer friendly, consumer friendly when it comes to things like that. So definitely something to check out. Another way is to look at alternate regions. This one's kind of a tricky one. Some people don't realize that alternate regions can be less costly. And really, this is a moving target. It changes all the time. But if you move a resource group from one region to another, you could experience some pretty significant savings. Again, it's a moving target, and if you just do a Google search on comparing the prices for the regions, or even if you use the cost calculator, the Azure pricing calculator, it gives you a pretty good breakdown and comparison side by side. A lot of people don't know about development and testing environments for Azure. So if you've got an enterprise agreement, and sometimes without, but mostly if you've got an enterprise agreement, you can get things like SQL databases at development or testing prices, as opposed to full production. And this is similar to, say, SQL Server Developers Edition, where it's meant specifically to be used for development purposes. You get all the features. They changed that to be free in the last couple of years. I mean, it used to only be $50 a year, and now it's free to get that developer edition, and you get all the features and all the functionality, and it's designed for just that, development and testing. And then part of the evaluation when we start to optimize, so the typical trend is you want to do some migration, whether, I used my example earlier where we're migrating our users' virtual machines up into Azure. We'll do some optimization to begin with there. When we do an assessment, it's going to say, you should use 4 vCores and 4 gig of RAM, and that will suffice for what you need based on the analysis that we did over the last 4 weeks. And then, when you start to look at those workloads, and maybe that's a web server or a database server, and you compare that to building a PaaS offering and hosting that on SQLDB or as an Azure web app or something like that, there could be a cost savings there, right? And you can't look at them necessarily, or you shouldn't look at them really necessarily side by side, because when you think about a virtual machine, you have to patch it, you have to maintain it, you have to monitor it, all of those pieces that go along with that back-end support, all that goes away with a PaaS offering, right? So it's doing its backups automatically for you. It's a checkbox, or it's a small configuration, and it's doing it all for you, as opposed to you having to do that configuration, monitor that, and everything else. So definitely do some evaluation, but don't use it on a pure cost basis of running a VM versus the PaaS offering. You have to factor in the time that it takes to maintain that VM as well. Now we talk about budgets, right? And so again, I'll do a quick demo of how we set up a budget and what the options are there. But really, the idea here is to plan for and drive accountability within the environment, right? So you have the ability to set a budget, which is essentially saying, okay, I want to spend X amount per month, and I want to get alerts that tell me that I have exceeded, or I am at 50% of, and want a notification to tell me when that's going to happen. This service is actually updated every 4 hours, so it'll go through and it'll do a reevaluation of what you've what you've consumed for the month. And once you hit one of the thresholds that are set, it will send you a notification. So it's pretty responsive. It's obviously if you're running a very hefty service in that time frame, in that service window, running a fully scaled out Azure SQL data warehouse, it's costing a couple $100 an hour or something like that. It's going to take a little bit to catch that, but certainly under normal circumstances, you're going to have the ability to keep an eye on this in fairly quick turnaround time. You can also trigger action groups, which gives you some more control, right? So you can run logic apps. You have more capability than just a simple notification. You can run Azure automation, run books. You can publish information to a log, or there's a lot of capability with what you can do here. And at the end, I've included a bunch of links that you guys can go through, and you'll see where a lot of the more detailed information around those are. You can also track your spending over time, right? So you can look at over the last year compared to the year before, or a month over month spend. You've got the opportunity to really kind of drill in and look at some details, and we'll show that real quick here too. And then you can reset each new period. So basically, at the end of your billing cycle, it's going to reset those thresholds, or you can set it up so that it just resets monthly, or however you want to do that, right? Once you get into a billing cycle, it's kind of like a credit card. They just, it's when you sign up, it's every month from there. But you've got the ability to, basically say, okay, well, I just want this to be normalized over the course of a month. Depends on your requirements. So you've got the ability to do that there. Azure Advisor is a great way to get a very nice bird's eye view of what's happening in your environment, right? So it's going to give you information on things like compute performance, your security, high availability of your resources. It's going to give you notifications and suggestions on ways to improve your offerings. So if you've got security requirements, or you've got cost overruns, you're hitting budget limits, it's going to give you a lot of information around those types of things, and all one nice little dashboard portal with a lot of drill through capabilities. All right, so we've got some time here to jump into a demo. So I'll bring up my portal. All right, so here I am in my Azure portal, and if I go down right along the left-hand side, I've got my cost management and billing. Okay, so when I come in here, it's basically going to show me my subscriptions. I've got 3 subscriptions going on here. So if I choose my Azure Pass subscription, I can go through and it gives me a basic breakdown, right, of some of my information. Now, if I want to say look at a cost analysis over here on the left-hand side, and not a lot going on this month, right? So, but it gives me a really nice breakdown of what everything is costing me, right? So my SQL database is $9 is what it's costing me this month so far. My storage is $527. Event Hubs are $285. So I've just got some information, on what the services are. This is all malleable. You can sort of do anything you want. You can break it down by a whole bunch of different things, whether it's resource group or tag or, categories, subcategories. You can look at it at resource types, those types of things. I run my stuff here in US East, but you can break it down by location. So if you're running in multiple regions, you can certainly do that. And then it shows me a breakdown of what each of my resource groups, are costing me. And so, again, you can do this with tags and things like that. And then, as you can see, we started with the month, right? And so I'm looking at this month. I've got the capability here to look at the last 7 days and what that's cost me, and so, just looking at some straight line over the last 7 days and where that's gone through. We can look at, this on a daily, monthly basis, right? So there's a lot of capability here as to how, you slice and dice this, and then you can also export this data. So if you're not, you're not seeing exactly how you want it to see it, you can export the information out. So now if we go into budgets, right, I can add a new budget, right? So pretty simple, it's all wizard driven, and say I want to look at, cost overrun, we'll call it. Right, and we got to have monthly here, and we go, then we go down and say I don't want to hit, I want to hit $100. It resets monthly, and basically when it's going to start, it kind of goes through. I can set it as my percent of my budget. So if I want to get a notification at 50% of my budget. I don't have any action groups defined, but I could go in there and create and manage my action groups. Just do that. So for the sake of seeing it, if you go in here and you add a new action group, you can see that you've got the action group name. It's going to look at what the resource group is, and then you can basically point it to what that action is. And so you can see you've got email and SMS or Azure Function, Logic App, Webhook, ITSM, or Automation Runbook. So that's how you can do a lot more than just sending an email when you have an issue with your action group. Close this and go back. So if I create my budget here, I'm going to send myself an email, right? At Pragmatic Works. Basically just create, right? And so now I've set up my cost overrun. I've set it for the amount. I can go back if I need to, and I can edit this. I can look in and drill down and look at the budget further, but essentially, I can go back and make any changes there that I want to, and that, that gives me that notification that I need if I've got any kind of concerns or issues there. And then I mentioned the Azure Advisor. So if I look at my advisor recommendations for this particular group, just doing a refresh here, but essentially it's going to be able to break down and tell me if I have any recommendations based on this environment. So for this, I have nothing. Actually, sorry. If I look at the list, that's the resource, sorry. So if I go back to my Azure Advisor for my overall environment, now this is going to give me any recommendations based on what subscriptions I choose, right? And so in here, this goes beyond just cost, but also security and everything else. So as this does a refresh based on my environment, these will refresh here in just a second. But you can see it's based on, hey, should you do something to make your environment more highly available? Are there security concerns? If we look at my recommendations for my security concerns, I've got 7 recommendations, and if we go and look at what those are, basically advanced data security should be enabled on my SQL servers. I can do that. Resolve monitoring agent health on your machines. I don't have monitoring on my machine. I didn't deploy an agent in there for monitoring. Provision my Azure AD administrator. So I don't have my Azure AD. So, but basically this gives you a nice little breakdown of what the issues are as it sees it in concerns. You can also whitelist some of these so it doesn't notify you on those, but certainly a nice feature to be able to kind of look at those. Now, if we go back to our advisor environment, you can see that I don't have any cost or performance recommendations. Basically it's if you're using the environments and it's going to notify you that you're running high on costs or something like that. You definitely want to have alerts about that, but this is a nice little central place to be able to look at those areas and have a nice little breakdown of what the cost and security issues are in your environment. So really that kind of wraps up with cost management today. So I'll go through here now and see what we have for questions. And then the last slide I have here is some good references plus on top of what else is in here. We'll definitely share out these slides. See if I can get to these questions. Crystal, can you see them? I got a really small window.
Yeah. No problem. Want me to read them off to you?
Oh, I got them. Okay, there we go.
Okay, got them.
What is the difference between subscription and resource groups? So when we look at, if we go back to my Azure portal here, your subscription, as it's broken down, is basically how your environment, if you will, is configured, right? So if we look at my subscriptions, I've got a Visual Studio, which is my development one. I've got my own personal pay-as-you-go, so I use my credit card to pay for that one. And then I've got an Azure Pass. I'm a Microsoft P seller. So Microsoft gives us a little bit of money just to play around with there. And so those are my 3 subscriptions. Within a subscription, you have resource groups. And so the resource groups are really a functional area. I use them for, so this one's named Event Hub Demo, or Sphere Demo, or Demo, resource group. And these are just a logical way of containerizing the different projects that I'm working on, and I highly recommend them because you can destroy an entire resource group, and if you'd like to, by deleting it, for the most part, by deleting the whole resource group, and you don't have to delete all of the resources. So next one is, what type of plan is $50 a year for dev test solutions? I'm not sure if that's in reference to my MSDN plan I was talking about, but so typically if you subscribe to MSDN, you get a credit of depending on the level, it's anywhere between 100 and I believe 200 a month. Not sure if that's what you're asking, Michael, but I think that's it, and that's something that you would get with your MSDN licensing when you buy something like Visual Studio or something like that. What history does the online cost analysis reporting hold? How many weeks, months does it go back? So there's actually quite a bit of information in here. So if we look at the cost management piece, and I look at, so I'll look at my pay-as-you-go account. I don't have much going on here, but essentially, if I go into some of the historical information, I'm not doing a whole lot in this particular subscription. But if we do go into the cost analysis, I can look at, a whole bunch of different options here. Last 12 months, you can do a custom date range. So, but if I look at the last 12 months, for instance, you can see that I've, sort of gone up and down on what my costs have been. And this is broken down as a cumulative. But if we go, so on a monthly basis, sort of see the peaks and valleys. I was, up to about $350 a month, and we were doing some demonstrations on managed instances, and so managed instances had to be running for a little while, and so those costs would accumulate. But then you could see I started fading away from those in January, and was able to bring some of my costs down. It gives you a nice little breakdown of all the information here. You can also group by various elements, right? So if I wanted to group by, say, resource group name, this will give you a nice little picture of what they are. You can see MI group, right, with the Windows jump box was the most costly back in October, and then the most costly one here was a new resource group I created for a different demo and stuff like that. So it gives you a nice breakdown. And again, all this can be exported, to a CSV, so you can do further analysis on that. Let's see. Do you think the data usage API is worth looking at? I'll be honest with you, I haven't had really much experience with the data usage API, so I can't really comment on it. My assumption is that the idea there is so that you can bring that information into your environment, and basically tie it in from there. One thing I did forget to mention, I skipped over earlier, was the ability to add in, let's go back to my cost management, was the ability to add in additional cloud connectors, right? So I can actually connect to my AWS environment and help take a look at those costs as well. With my Azure cost management. I know there is a small cost that goes to that. It's a percentage of your monthly spend in AWS, but it is nice to have it all in one portal so you can do comparisons there. And then again, we mentioned Cloud in earlier. It's basically, somewhat being end of lifed by Azure Cost Management. Microsoft CSP partner administrators or cloud solution providers are, people that would resell Office 365 or Microsoft 365, things like that. So it's specific to those types of environments for users for their cost management that way. And you can still use Cloud In for now. They will end of life this for customers at some point, and you'll need to basically go through and migrate any of the reports you have over to Azure. Unfortunately, there isn't a direct migration tool at this time, but the features are very similar. So reconfiguring and re-enabling shouldn't be too much of a challenge for you. And then, okay, so Michael came back and said we have MSDN, get $150 per month per MSDN, so I wasn't sure if you're $50. Oh, no, that's exactly what I was talking about. So appreciate that, Michael. So it should be good to go. And I think that's the last question. Crystal, do you see any more? I think that's it.
I do not. I think that's it on my end.
Okay, great. All right, great. Well, yeah. Hopefully, I was able to answer those sufficiently for everybody. And gave you sort of what you were expecting from the event here. Feel free to reach out to us, contact your sales rep certainly if you've got additional questions, and we can definitely point you down the right path. You have my contact information, and you'll also have these slides going forward. Otherwise, appreciate the time, appreciate everybody showing up, and have a great rest of your Thursday. Thanks, Crystal.
No problem. Thank you, Chris, so much for hosting. And like Chris said, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. This has been recorded, and you guys will receive a link tomorrow in your email. So, and it will also be on YouTube. All of our webinars on YouTube now. So if you guys are looking for an old one or a past one, they are there. But this one will be in your inbox tomorrow. So just stay tuned for that. And Chris, thank you again so much for hosting. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.